from a couple, but we've still got our main person here in Drew Sherman. Drew is the General Manager of Technical and Academy at Melbourne Victory Football Club, and his topic for tonight is planning for success. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to tell us tonight. Before we go any further, though, I would like to first acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet. For those of us in Gippsland, that's the Gunai people. I'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, as well as acknowledge any First Nation people that may join us tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge the organisations that have assisted in bringing you these sessions. Firstly, the Latrobe Valley Authority and their sporting partners, the Collingwood Football Club, Melbourne Victory and the Melbourne Boomers. Special thanks also to Basketball Victoria Country, AFL Gippsland, Football Victoria and Netball Victoria. Tonight we've had around 115 people registered. I'm expecting at least half of those to log in. I think we've got about 40 odd at the moment. If I could just make sure, I've mentioned already, if you just keep your webcams off and microphones on mute, if you can, please, it'd be appreciated. Feel free, though, to use the chat function in the chat room. It's a great way to stay engaged in the session and to share your ideas, comments and feedback with fellow participants. I think a few people may have actually had some issues with this last week. So if you are having any issues accessing the chat function, then please feel free to send any comments or questions that you may have through to me via email. So that's ryan@gippsport.com.au. As in other sessions, we won't expect Drew to monitor the chat room during his presentation, but I will keep track of the discussion and any emails I receive, and will collate any key questions for him for the end of the presentation. So that's it for me tonight. David, did Craig make it in the end?
No, he hasn't, mate.
No, he hasn't. No problems at all. So we'll get straight to Drew. And as I mentioned before, Drew is a General Manager of Technical and Academy at Melbourne Victory Football Club. He has quite an impressive resume, having arrived at Melbourne Victory last year with a wealth of experience in youth development and coaching programs. Drew has held coaching and management positions in academies at Everton, Wolves, Aldershot, Crawley and Southampton in England, and more recently Brisbane Roar in the Hyundai A-League. He's a much respected coach, and we're very grateful for having him join us tonight. So thanks, Drew. I'll hand the reins over to you.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to present this evening. Something that is a really interesting space for me, positive coaching. Something that really is a pleasure to be able to share some of my experiences, and really tonight's sort of presentation will be a little bit about myself. So I'll just it's a very brief presentation, and a lot of it will be talking about my experiences, to be honest with you, and some of what my current role is. So hopefully everybody can see the presentation on screen. Okay. The topic for tonight is obviously planning for success, and this is relative to my current role. So my background, as you said, is really as a coach, and it's been largely on the field. I was fortunate enough to I consider never really had a proper job. I've worked in professional sport since I was still 16 years old. Firstly as a player for a short period of time before moving quite quickly into coaching, and realizing that was where sort of my future in professional sport lay. So I've probably coached for now close to 16 years I'm still in my early 30s, so it's something that I've accumulated a degree of experience in. My current role, however, is removed from the pitch, and what I'll share tonight will be a little bit about the experiences around how, in an organisation, like a professional sports organisation, but also a grassroots organisation, some of the principles around leading people and developing positive working relationships from coaching transfer into acting as an organizational leader. So I'll give a little insight as to what my job presently entails, and I'll talk about some of the sort of the 5 sort of tips, really, or 5 things that that I've found in my experience in management positions, whether they be coaching positions or whether they be sort of off field, more within the management of the organization. Some almost commandments that have served me well. This is by no means me coming on to preach. That this is a way that You need to work. This is purely how I've found, I guess, through trial and error mostly, and what I've settled has worked for me. So it's a pleasure again to be invited to speak to you this evening, and hopefully you can take something from it, and we'll have a little bit of discussion in the Q&A at the end. In terms of tonight's presentation, what I'll go through briefly will be just to talk a little bit about my role. I'll talk around the vision of our organisation and where that's derived from, where that comes from, and how important it is to actually to be clear in how you set a vision. Then I'll talk about how we transfer that into really a mission statement that involves our people, and this is the start point of positive coaching with the employees that work within our organisation, and how we get the most out of our people. And then I'll move into a little bit of those sort of 5 pillars around leadership that I've found have sort of remained consistent with me, both in a capacity of delivering the more on-pitch to traditional coaching, and more around the, I suppose, organisational coaching that my current role entails. So just briefly before I move on, my present role has evolved quite significantly during the last sort of 18 months that I've been in Melbourne. I originally came here to oversee the youth development infrastructure, or the player development infrastructure at Melbourne Victory, and it's sort of morphed into overseeing the whole of football, really. So everything that encompasses our professional teams, our player development infrastructure, how we develop our sport, our football development infrastructure, and also our community engagement, which is more about using football as a mechanism for social good. So I now sort of oversee all 4 of those and make sure that there's continuity in the approach, and a truly integrated approach across the 4 of them. It's a big change that sort of happened in my career, to move from a playing career into coaching and then into sort of off-pitch management role isn't where I necessarily saw myself, if I'm completely honest. I guess it's just an evolution. I don't think that's any different from most people's experiences and careers. Sometimes you end up somewhere you might not have thought that you would when you sort of set out. My coaching background, just very briefly, as mentioned earlier on, I had a short professional playing career at a club called Swansea City in England, which moved into coaching quite quickly. I was told by a coach that my feet weren't as fast as my head, and I was probably better off to think about coaching rather than playing. I was fairly fortunate that I had good support, and I actually have a father who was involved in coaching and coach education. So I guess I'd been educated subconsciously into coaching effectively from birth. So it was a natural step for me. I moved through my coaching licenses and qualifications, as you do, and I took my first management role in coaching at the age of 23 at a professional club in England. I sort of progressed through the English system and ended up in a very well-renowned club in Southampton Football Club, which is sort of prestigious for their youth development infrastructure, in a role there overseeing the under 12 to under 16 age groups. And then I actually left and I went to a place I'd never heard of, the Cook Islands. At that moment in time, I'd never heard of it, for an experience, I suppose, and oversaw their national team program, which taught me a lot about some of the principles that I'll mention in the next slide. How important it is to be able to adapt to your environment and understand your environment, the people within it, your organisation, and culture before you can even start the process of setting a direction or a vision that is going to get people on board and is going to ensure that an organisation is aligned. I definitely learned some major experiences during my time there. After that, I was very fortunate then to have the opportunity to move to Australia, and I've since worked in roles in youth development, establishing a youth development program at Brisbane Roar, and then doing the same here at Melbourne Victory before I'm in my current role. So just to move on, setting a vision, and with this, there's some key components. There's sort of two facets to this that I found have been useful. First one is understanding who we are, as I mentioned. And there's 4 areas that for me are important to understand. And I'll speak about this briefly because it has some context as we move into, I guess, the 5 pillars of positive coaching in planning for success. So this is really still setting some background context. The first one is to understand your environment. Any organization that you work in, any sport, it has a very unique ecosystem and very unique business objectives. And none are more prevalent than the current time that we face, right? With the year that certainly the entire globe has had with the COVID pandemic, and specifically in the Gippsland region with the bushfires at the early part of the year. I think it's fair to say that the environment in which we operate here in Victoria is very unique across all sport, and we have to understand that. In our sport specifically, we're in another unique circumstance in a global context. Football, soccer is a global sport, and it's a sport that is played. It's more popular than effectively any other sport globally. But that's not the case here in Australia. It's far from the #1 sport. Although our participation numbers with junior participants are very high, I think we're the most participated in sport. It's certainly not doesn't have the media coverage, doesn't have the broadcast revenue, doesn't have the attention of the mainstream Australian public in the way that the traditional Australian sports do. So understanding that when you come from a country that is immersed and it's very hard to escape from football, in itself presents some unique challenges that you need to understand. Secondly, understanding yourself. And I think this is a really important part of being a coach. We each have personal values and personal beliefs that we sort of lead our lives by. And we have a degree of accumulated experience and knowledge in a chosen field, whatever that may be. To be confident in that and be firm to who you are and be authentic is one of the key things that the top coaches in any sport talk about regularly. That you have to be the person you are rather than try to be somebody else, because eventually it's very difficult to maintain a charade, right? So to know who you are, to know your strengths, your weaknesses intimately, your beliefs and your values is an absolute fundamental part of being able to understand the way in which you need to operate. Next is understand your organisation. So of course your organisation sits into an environment, but in our space to understand our club. Our club is a club that's been around for 15 years. So comparative again to the traditional Australian sporting clubs that have been around for generations, 100-year AFL clubs, or even the traditional football clubs that have been around for much longer. We're a relative newcomer. We're still in our infancy as a club. However, we were formed as an amalgamation, really, as a franchise to be inclusive for the whole of Melbourne and the whole of Victoria. Hence our name. So understanding sort of who we are, where we've come from, what our original purpose was, as well as the history that we've accumulated in a short time, is really important when it comes to setting strategy and making sure that the people that are connected to you, whether they're the members and the fans, whether they're your commercial sponsors, whether they're your players and your coaches, they buy into who you are as a club. There's a reason that they turn up to watch the games. There's a reason that they want to associate themselves with the club, and usually it's because it represents them. So to understand who our club is to people is again fundamentally important. And the last one is to understand our people. Every workplace environment, whether it's sport, whether it's business, has a distinct culture and a strong set of values, and it's no good if your personal values, your personal beliefs aren't aligned to the rest of your people. I think it's fair to say that's a marriage that will end in divorce. But in our space, again, we are a club that's owned by private individuals. So it's not only important to understand our culture across all of our people, but also intimately understand the aspirations of our owners, as ultimately, they're the guys that invest their time and money into providing a club for the people. Once we understand who we are, the next step really in terms of being able to plan for success is talk about where we want to go. As I mentioned briefly, my current role oversees these 4 components, and we have a whole of football plan with some really broad strategy and a mission statement. Now, this is driven very, very much by our owners. This is what they believe the club should be about, and it's driven by the history of the club, where we've come from, to understand where we see ourselves going in the future. It's also driven by the environment in which we operate. There's an ambition at our club, which is to be the leading club in Australia in a football context, but also to be competing at the top end of Asia, which puts us in a unique space in regards to most other club-based sports in Australia. AFL, there isn't an Asian competition. The same with NRL, for example, or netball. So for us, it's to be leading in a confederation that has probably not a major history in our sport, exactly the same way that we don't, but also is an emerging nation with significant resources in business as well as in our sport. So that's our ambition, to be seen as a leading club in Asia, and to be leading in Australia across these 4 pillars. And ultimately, whether it's our community engagement strategy, how we give people a positive experience at the front door of football, how we help to develop our game locally, which in turn means that the quality of players we're able to get into our player development infrastructure is higher. And of course, the better the local players, the better the Australian talent pool, the more successful our professional teams will be in being able to achieve that goal. So it's then being able to come up with, I guess, some key departments within the football department that all understand the role they play in helping us to achieve that goal. That's it, I suppose, from an organisational perspective, and specifically in our context, where we sit, to give you a framework. What I'll start to talk about now is more in relation to actually our people, and what I find is the way in which we're able to coach our people and work with them in a positive manner, that they can achieve that goal, and they can help us move towards our mission statement and success. And ultimately, whether we're talking about an organisation, in a global perspective, such as the case with Melbourne Victory, or if we're talking about our under 14s team that we coach in local football, I think the process is similar. We have an environment, we have our people, we have a history of who we are as a group, and we have, as a leader of that group, personal sets and beliefs. We also have a vision of where we want to go, whether that's short term and we want to win the local league, whether that's long term and we want to be seen as a benchmark organisation in the world. I think that the process is the same. What I'll talk about now will be some of the transferable skills that hopefully will benefit you in those environments, whether they're the local football under 14 grassroots team, or whether it's a multinational corporation. Hopefully there's some learning to be taken, or some discussion to be had from the next part. I think that the number one thing for me is that it's impossible for us to achieve success if we aren't able to truly involve our people and involve them in shaping that strategy. So although we may have some broad brushstrokes around a mission statement and a vision, which describe where the organisation wants to go and who we are, that will encourage people to want to be part of the journey, but they won't necessarily encourage them to be proactive in helping you achieve that. And I think that's where involving the people within the organisation and attracting the right people to the organisation becomes fundamentally important. That's the recruitment process, and then obviously the coaching process. In terms of developing the strategy, I think our people have to be involved in this from the outset. whilst we may have a skeleton in that mission statement, the flesh and the muscle and the skin that we need to put to that skeleton, this comes from our people and the qualities that they bring as individuals. So the key to this is that as a leader in an organization or as a coach of a team, you need to be able to articulate the destination, and you need to be able to do it in a manner that motivates people to want to get on the bus. And that's fundamentally important as a mechanism to empowering people to therefore find the way to get there. It's no good for us to be setting the sat nav and we're just expecting people to be micromanaged towards achieving a goal. My experience is it doesn't work. It doesn't last. It's not sustainable. It's more around setting the destination. This is where we want to go. You find the best way to get us there, the most efficient way, the way that works in our environment, the way that fits with our values, the way that fits within our resources. And I think that empowering factor is one key way of maintaining motivation amongst people that you may effectively be leading. The second one is to spend a lot of time with those people. And I mean a lot of time with them. This is a really important part. People want to feel valued. People want to feel included. People want to feel supported in being able to work with that level of autonomy. But you also need to, as a leader, to be able to have built a bond and to develop trust with those people. And I think that comes to spending a lot of time with them in different environments. In your sporting environment, in a more formal work environment, in a social environment, you need to spend a lot of time and really understand your people almost as well as you understand yourself. To give you some context to this, my current role sort of works with the leaders of each of our mini departments, whether it's our A-League head coach or our W-League head coach, whether it's the person in charge of our player development infrastructure or our football development infrastructure. I can tell you now, I mean, my wife won't be happy that I'm saying this, but I probably spend more time talking to our head coaches than I do with my wife at this moment in time, even though we're in lockdown. And that's not a good thing considering she's 38 weeks pregnant. So it certainly causes me a challenge. But I think it's a fundamentally important part of being successful and helping people achieve success. You have to spend a significant amount of time with the people that you've surrounded yourself with. And it's no good spending a lot of time with them if you don't truly listen. And this, again, for whether you're a coach of a young player, whether you're a boss in a big organization, you have to be, I suppose, open enough and honest enough to understand that you're only as successful as the people that you have around you. The best leaders, they engage with people underneath them that are more proficient than they would be at their specific level of expertise. You need to be able to therefore trust people and listen to them, but question them too, and get that sort of feedback. And that comes again with maintaining motivation around empowerment. It sounds like three pretty simple things, but you'd be surprised how many people forget to do these and forget to do them regularly. And it's really not that difficult to speak to people, spend a lot of time with them and listen to them. The next process is to then discuss together, to develop the strategy together. I think that this is another important component of coaching people, in that it's really important that they feel a sense of not just motivation in the initial sense, but then a sense of trust, because it's a collective direction that we take to achieve a goal. It's not something that you've been dictated to, and it's not something you've been given total autonomy over, and therefore sometimes there's a pressure of responsibility. It's something that the people feel trusted, that your co-workers, your employees feel trusted in their autonomy, but also that there's support, that you're on the same page, and that you believe the process or the strategy or whatever is required is the right way to go about something. And this process takes a lot of time, and that discussion may lead you to different parts as you continue to evaluate, and as that strategy evolves. It may lead you to different parts, and it becomes a cycle at this point. As you progress through something, spend a lot of time with people. Listen, how are things going? Make sure we discuss and question where we're at. And the fifth part of this, and this is the really important part, because this is the biggest thing that determines whether you're successful or not, is to act. And to act with conviction, and to act quickly. Certainly in our space, in professional sport, I'm sure everybody's aware that it's a changing ecosystem, almost daily. At this moment in time around coronavirus, the whole world changes almost daily with some of the restrictions on the way that we operate. So you have to act quickly. You can't spend time to deliberate. Once there's an agreement, once there's been stakeholder engagement, and that you've listened to your people, you need to act quickly. And for us, we always then make sure that we act in a manner that befits our values of who we are, who we want to be seen as a culture, what our owners expect, in a way that's respectful to the environment and ecosystem in which we work. And we then have five values, that sit in our club at Melbourne Victory, and that's to act in a way that's inspiring, to act in a way that's ambitious, to act in a way that's inclusive, and this goes back to who we are when we formed as a club, to act boldly, and to always act with integrity, and to be honest. And I think that therefore allows you to put in place a framework that when you're leading and working with people, one, make sure they're motivated. Two, make sure they feel empowered, involved, and supported. And three, make sure that they're accountable. And for me, if you have a group of people working with you, whether they're your players, whether they're the staff that you manage, whether it's your children, I think ultimately they'll be successful if they have those three things. If they're empowered, if they're motivated, if they feel supported, if they feel loved, and they're held accountable for actions, whether it's success and failure. They're held accountable, but they feel supported that they're not going to be scorned, for being brave. I guess that's it from me. Hopefully those 5 simple things will give a little bit of insight into sort of the way in which I work. It's not, like I said, I'm not here to preach. This is sort of, this is the way to lead in this type of role. That's certainly not the intention of being able to share with you this evening. It merely is a point of discussion. I'd love in the chat now, in the Q&A, for people to share ideas as much as ask questions, because these type of forums where we have the opportunity to present, that makes us accountable. It makes us accountable as a club as well, and it helps us to evolve the way in which we do business and the way in which we conduct ourselves. So if there are any questions, by all means, I'm happy to answer those. Feel free, if there's some comments, I've put my email address on the screen to send through some comments and feedback. I'd certainly love to hear that, and anything in your organisation. So again, I'll stop the screen sharing now before my internet breaks, but I'm happy to answer your questions the next however long it needs to be.
Perfect. Thanks, Drew. And I'll just encourage everyone just to pop some questions in the chat if they'd like them answered, or as I said, if there's any issues, feel free to send me an email with your question. I might just start off actually, Drew. You just mentioned the importance of spending a lot of time with people. Has that been difficult or a challenge during the COVID-19 restrictions? And going forward, is there any practices you've actually done in recent months which you'll probably continue that have perhaps worked and might be a different way of doing things?
Yeah, 100%. It's obviously been the biggest challenge, right? The lack of social interaction that we've been able to face. When we work with, and we spend time with all our people. We encourage all of our staff to spend time with all our people. We have children, with us, and those of you that are parents see how hard it is for children, how much they miss that social engagement. So there's some things we've done, almost like quiz night things rather than training with the kids. We have probably bi-weekly staff meetings as catch-up points. We have at least weekly coaches meetings where we ask coaches to research something and present. So there's a lot of different things that we're trying to do to keep our people engaged. I'll be honest, I spend a significant amount of time on my phone speaking to people, and that happens anyway. Prior to COVID, as I said, our sport, we're a small piece in the puzzle, really. We're not the major destination for our sport in a global context. Therefore, it's so important that in my role, that we remain connected to Europe or to South America. So I spend a lot of my time, so this time in the evening, on the phone, speaking to people, sharing ideas, sharing practice, trying to make sure we're relevant, and we're up to speed. And then that knowledge is shared down. So I think there's ways and means, certainly, and we've certainly evolved our practices to deliver, our training online, to liaise with our players and have meetings online, to meet our staff groups, like every business has, I would say.
Sure, no problems at all. I've got another question here for you. How do you measure success for player pathways?
Good question. So I think the key to that is it cannot be in the short term. A true player pathway needs 10 to 15 years to establish in order to measure success. So there will be small indicators around an element of success, but to claim that a pathway is truly successful, you need to evaluate it in the long term. It's the only way. For us, we've had a full academy program here at Melbourne Victory for a season, which hasn't been a season. So for us to evaluate any success, really, we're talking, I'd say, a minimum of 10 years from now, when our 12-year-olds are 22. At that moment in time, then we're able to evaluate it. And they will be some fairly standard measures. It will be how many players are we able to graduate into professional football, whether it be our club, ideally, whether it be other clubs within the professional environment in the A-League, and most importantly for us, whether it be overseas, to the top leagues of the world, because ultimately that's where in our sport a transfer market exists, and that's where you generate return on investment. So that's the true measure of success. But I think there are other measures in a player pathway that are very important, and I think that's how well you equip young people to go on to be successful in life away from sport. And that is a fundamentally important one for us. We are in a unique position in that our sport, compared to, say, the UK, is played by brighter kids, that have academic aspirations, where it's not often the case in the UK. So we need to be able to support that pathway and to support aspirations in that. Ultimately, a sporting career finishes at 35 maximum. So there's still a lot of people's life that they need to be prepared for. So for us, we track players that exit our programs and keep tabs on how they're progressing. And we have quite an extensive sort of player care process, so that we're equipping them with the life skills needed to be successful beyond sport.
Yeah, sure. Sounds great. Good answer. Next question is from Gabrielle, and she's keen to know, what if players are lagging or coaches are lagging? What are the motivators?
Discussion. I think that's where talking to them is fundamentally important. If once you've got them to that point, I think you've missed some key windows of opportunity to address it. There should be the trust for a player to open up to a coach, for a coach to be able to open up to a leader in a sport organization and explain. And there'll be things that you have to look for too, right? You have to understand that young players. Somebody once told me, I was working with in the UK, when you have a young player come into your environment, and typically we train in the evening, you're maybe the sixth person that's demanding something of them in that day. So we have to have a degree of understanding around what they're going through, around that there will be times where they're not motivated. But I think it becomes, and you need to look for those warning signals that might tell you, actually, this is more than just an off day. This is more than someone not feeling quite right, and then be able to talk about it and listen. And I think those two steps stop you getting into that situation. Ultimately, if it has happened, and it does happen, we can't address it for everybody. the key then is to involve that person in what the next step looks like, whether it's a coach, whether it's a player. You know, in professional sport, there's the tough decisions that have to be made around exiting professional sport. And again, that comes back to my answer in the last question, really. It's about how do we do that in a manner where they feel engaged and motivated about what the next step of their journey looks like, even though it's not with you, and that you're there to support them in that process, whether that's a coach, whether that's a player, whoever.
Okay, make sure obviously communication sounds like a really important part of that, and understanding, you know, what some of the factors are that are contributing to that. Julia has got the next question, and it's: do you have a top tip you use to manage the diversity of skills and abilities in your playing group or teams?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and it's one that my expertise, I'll be honest with you, has always been in talented players, right? So I am certainly not as proficient in this or as experienced as I imagine the significant number of you working in that environment day upon day. I think that is a true skill. It's something that takes a great deal of expertise. And I guess my tip would be always to just have a few simple cues around tasks within training and tasks within games. You know, again, in environments, your grassroots environments where you want people to remain participating, they need to feel an appropriate level of challenge. Now, that's easier said than done. But just perhaps put in a couple of very simple tasks for those that are, you know, hopefully the practice challenges those who are in the coping phase. But those that are striving ahead, how do we then test them? Those that are maybe struggling to keep up, how do we make sure they still feel motivated by the task that's at hand? So there can be different ways to do that. You know, it might be that there's fluidity around how you group players within tasks. It might mean that different players have to move within the environment at different times. And again, that goes back to communication with stakeholders that are not just the player, perhaps the parents. Well, how's that perceived? What does that mean? So I think it's something that needs to be a global approach to, and you need to sort of understand your environment and the goals with that for players that are in one of those three categories: striving to keep up, coping, or striving ahead. So I think it's about planning, really.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. And we're going to keep probing you for tips, because the next one is tips on how to increase intensity within your playing group without losing any players.
Yeah, good question. That's another good question. Shout at them. No, I think it comes to the motivation. I'm a big believer that if you have the right environment, those are things that take care of themselves. You know, we're very big as a club on better people, better players. You know, and for us, what we won't do is bring someone in that doesn't necessarily fit our values. You know, in terms of some of the commitment traits that might cause a problem in, say, the intensity of a session. However, not everyone's environment has the luxury of selecting players, right? So I understand that can be a big challenge. I think it comes down to, again, you know, the task-based approach. It comes down to time spent with players and individual discussions on those type of things, because ultimately the intensity of a session will be dictated to by the lowest common denominator. So it only takes one player in there to act like the terrorist in the group, you know. And I think that's the challenge that you have to sometimes move past, and how you manipulate that. It can definitely be a challenge, and I don't think there's anything wrong with, at times, from a coaching perspective, being the driver of intensity with your voice. And I think that can be done positively, you know, without it seeming artificial. I think this is something that certainly in our sport in Australia is lacking. It is almost taboo, that we aren't too comfortable to raise our voice at the right time, you know, with the right tone, to drive intensity. And I'm not talking about shouting at players. I'm talking about positive praise and reinforcement, highlighting somebody doing something well, so that the attractors realize that that's the intention that's craved. You know, so I think those are the ways in which it can be done.
Sure, sounds good. Drew, you've obviously been very heavily involved with a lot of junior development, and one thing that comes with juniors is their parents. The next question from Daniel is, what measures would you take when there appears to be a lack of buy-in amongst the parent group of a junior sports team?
Involve them more. Involve them more is the key. I think that's the absolute key. We do a lot of workshops with the parents. We involve them in the things that aren't necessarily about football. We phone them regularly during COVID, to find out how they're going with other components of their lives. I think if the parents, again, it's about trust. If you can develop trust in parents that are key stakeholders in player development, they're the most important person in a young player's development process. So you have to treat them that way. Don't be afraid to open your arms to them and to listen to advice, but also be open enough to tell them why advice may or may not be appropriate and how it fits into your philosophy. If you're clear on what you're trying to achieve and where you're going, parents will make a choice to be involved or to not be involved, and I think that's something you have to accept. When parents cross the line and you've given them the opportunity to be involved, they also need to be told as well. And I think that's a really important thing that we shouldn't be afraid to do. And I think the key as well with parents is to have the child with the parent often and speak to the child where the parent can observe. So in reviews with the player, whether it's debriefs after the game, talk to the player, but with the parent present. And I think that rather than speaking to the parent about the player, talking to the player with the parent present shifts the dynamic of those relationships.
Sure, that sounds good. Now, I've just got a handful more questions before we let you off the hook, Drew. Next one is from Mick, and it's, what is the elite level expectations of a junior community level coach between the balance of enjoyment and performance?
There shouldn't be a balance. For me, it's enjoyment. There's nothing more important. Players will perform when they're enjoying what they do. That's around developing intrinsic motivation. Whether you're coaching a professional team, if your players do not enjoy coming to work and they think of it as work rather than a hobby they get paid for, you got a major problem. So the whole focus should be around enjoyment. The good thing is that a lot of people enjoy learning. So people will enjoy something that they feel they're getting better at. So I don't think there needs to be a trade-off. Your main focus should always be upon making sure that your sessions are enjoyable, the players are engaged, and this is where, again, a lot of people that have played to a certain level have a little bit of a head start, because they can empathize directly with whether they'd like the session or like the practice. And I think that should be the first question in the planning process. Once you've planned, would I actually want to do this? Would I enjoy doing this? And if the answer is no, don't do it. And I think it's that simple for me. I don't think that it changes at all between grassroots and player development or performance pathway. I actually think it's fundamentally important that the players love what they do. So I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Absolutely. Next one's regards to, you've obviously rubbed shoulders with a lot of other coaches, and different coaches have different styles. How would you be able to change or improve coaches' styles to a more positive coaching style?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, again, you need to have clarity on some guiding principles. So a guiding principle around a coaching methodology and a coaching framework, but you also need to give the coaches license to experiment within that and be authentic to who they are. Now, it can be challenging. The biggest thing will be that the coaches need to buy into the framework, that philosophically what the purpose of your coaching is, the way in which you coach, so your methodology, the way in which sessions are structured, the types of practices you want to use, the types of communication you want to use, the process around your individualization of coaching and mentoring. That they need to buy into the framework, but then once they're on board with that, they have to they have the license to adapt in different ways, because ultimately everyone's individual. all the players are individuals, and some will relate good to different types of coaches. So some will like a more authoritarian approach. Some will like to feel more engaged. I think the coaches need license to be to experiment within that without contravening your values and your beliefs as an organisation, as a club. And that's why the codes of conduct are so important, right? It's something that people are accountable to. And I think, again, the same process can be used. Involve the people in where we're trying to go and how we're going to get there. Spend a lot of time with your coaches, listen to your coaches, why they act the way in which they do, why they believe that's the right way. Start to discuss that and see if you can evolve the outcomes or the approach to be more efficient. And that's all it is. No one's doing it because they believe it's a bad way to coach. They believe it's the right way. So find the right way together. And it takes time. It definitely takes time. You just need to be brave enough to say when something's not acceptable, that it can't be tolerated.
Yeah, fair enough. Great response. And we've got the one more question here at this stage, which is from Mark, and it's how important is ongoing coach development, and what it's just moved on me as people have commented, sorry. So how important is ongoing coach development, and what importance do you think it plays at a community level sport?
Really important. Yeah, really important. I think it's not really, certainly in our sport, I wouldn't say coaching is really considered a professional in this country, a profession in this country. There's very, very limited opportunities to work full time as a coach. It's almost seen as a hobby, and therefore the people that end up coaching are those people that are always willing to go above and beyond. So the good thing about that is they're always seeking additional learning opportunities and professional development, whether they have access to them as freely as they would like. I don't know. I think it depends on the state, the governing body organisations in respective sports and the role that professional clubs might play, as well as things now around access to technology that have opened doors that didn't exist before. I think the key is that that all helps you to build that sort of knowing yourself piece around your beliefs, the way you want to work, your approach. But there has to be the support from the other areas around coach development too. Within our organisation, what's our culture? What's our environment? What's the way in which our history dictates the way we go about things? And I think that's where there needs to be a defined mentoring process to develop coaches. And I think that has to happen in every organisation, because whether it's professional or whether it's grassroots, our grassroots clubs, for example, or grassroots clubs that are interested in being involved with us, we've got a quite expansive program called Club Victory, that's designed for that. And our whole football development program is so we can give back opportunities to coach development. Ultimately, the better the coaches at grassroots level, the better the best players are that we will want to bring into the program at sort of 13, 14 years of age, right? So it doesn't make sense to not invest significant amounts of time in that.
Sounds great. And we're getting close to the hour there, and it's looking like there's no more questions. There's a lot of positive feedback though, Drew, so I really appreciate having you on for tonight's session, and I'm about to answer a few curly questions in there as well. So I'm just quickly scroll down, but I think that's it for the questions, if anyone's got any last ones. But yeah, lots of positive feedback there, mate. So it is getting close to the hour, so we might look at bringing things to a close there. And obviously I'd like to thank Drew for joining us this evening and give us his insights into planning for success. I know I really enjoyed the session. I've jotted down a few notes that I'll be using going forward, and hopefully everyone else here was able to take a bit out of the session as well. We did have a second speaker organised in Craig Moore from Football Victoria. He was organised for tonight, but did have some technical difficulties, so he has put in an apology, and we'll hope to get involved with something down the track if anyone's keen to hear from him. A reminder that we have our fourth and our last positive coaching session next Wednesday night at 7 p.m. And in that session, we'll be looking at the competitive cycle. So if you haven't already, make sure you register for that session. But until then, unless there's anything else you wanted to add, Drew, before we finish up?
No, again, just thanks for the opportunity to present. We are very open and very supportive of, trying to engage people who are involved in local sport. We do have a mechanism called Club Victory. that I'd encourage people to be involved with or connect with our club through, social media channels and those type of things if you're interested in more ongoing support, I guess. But no, I really appreciate everyone's time to listen to me talk for an hour. So thanks for that.
The hour went by. I really enjoyed some of the insights you gave us then, Drew. So yeah, very appreciative of having you on board. So yeah, obviously best of luck going forward over the next 12 months and as things hopefully return to normal with the post-COVID situation. And so that's going to be a good night from us. And yeah, we'll hope to see you all again next Wednesday night. Until then.